Hi, so we have Module 3, Lesson 11. We've been working on adding fractions. We've been working on adding mixed numbers, whole numbers with fractions. Now we're working on subtracting fractions. So adding subtractions and subtracting fractions are very similar in terms of they need to have like units. They need to have common denominators, which in this whole worksheet they do not. We are first going to create common denominators, make equivalent fractions, and then subtract, okay? So let's start with problem B. You are going to work on A, C, E on your own. I am working with you to do B, D, and F. So the instructions say, generate equivalent fractions to get like units, then subtract. So same steps we've been working on yesterday, except instead of adding them, we will subtract them. Okay, so that's the only difference for today. So B, we have 7/10 minus 1/3. So if we're looking at our denominators, we have tenths and thirds. Those are not like units, so we need to make like units by using multiplication. So we have then, we would have 7/10 minus 1/3, but we need to rewrite it where we will have multiplication in the fraction in order to make denominators the same. So we would have 10 times, so we're going to multiply by the opposite denominator, which is 3. And what you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top, times 3. So then we would have 3 times the opposite denominator, which is 10. So times 10 and times 10. What you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Okay? So now our next step is going to be to solve for the multiplication parts and then to make equivalent fractions. So equivalent fraction means that this fraction is the same as this fraction. They're the same size. The only thing that's different is the pieces, the denominators and the numerators, but it's still the same exact size of quantity that it started with, okay? So let's multiply. So 7 times 3 is 21. 10 times 3 is 30. So now we have 21/30 minus 1 times 10 is 10. 3 times 10 is 30. 10/30. Now we have equivalent fractions. So this fraction is the same as this fraction, and this fraction is equivalent to this fraction, okay? So now we can subtract because now we have common units. We now have common denominators. So remember, our denominator is just telling us the size of the piece or out of how many pieces. So they're 30ths. And then we'd subtract our numerators. 21 minus 10. So that would be 11. So we have 11/30. Okay. So now let's work on D. So let's use the same steps. So first, looking at our denominators, here we have 1 2/5 minus 3/8. So I'm looking at this one a little bit differently as well because this one also has a whole number in it. So the whole number, we may need to borrow from it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this whole and I'm going to plug it back into the numerator, back into the fraction. So 1 whole in fifths is also 5/5, okay? So this mixed number is also like 5/5 plus the 2/5 that it had left over here. So 5/5 plus 2/5 equals 7/5. So we can use 7/5 minus 3/8 to solve our problem, okay? So now we need to find our common denominators. So we can do that simply by just multiplying by the opposite denominator. So 5 times the 8, and then what you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. And then 8 times the 5, and what you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. Okay, so now let's find our equivalent fractions by multiplying them. So we have 7 times 8 is 56. And then 5 times 8 is 40, minus 3 times 5 is 15, 8 times 5 is 40. Okay, so now we have 56/40 minus 15/40. So our denominator stays the same. And now we have 56 minus 15, which is 41. So 41/40. You can leave it like that. The answer will be correct, but you can also go farther and think about, but don't plug this into the class assignment. This is more than one whole. This is exactly one whole and 1/40 left over. Okay. All right. So now let's do F. So F says 2 1/3 minus 1 1/5. So this one has more holes to it. 2 holes minus 1 hole. We can go ahead and subtract our holes first. So 2 minus 1, which is 1. So we're going to leave that 1 there, but we have to remember that we're going to add it to whatever fraction we have left over in the end. Okay, so let's just leave it at 1 plus. So now we need to find our common denominators, our like units. So we have thirds and we have fifths. 1/3 minus 1/5. Okay, so now we need to figure out what we're going to multiply each denominator by to make denominators common. So thirds we're going to multiply by 5, and what you do to the bottom you have to do to the top. And fifths we're going to multiply by thirds, and what you do to the bottom you have to do to the top. Okay, so now let's find our equivalent fractions by multiplying these. So we still have the 1 plus, so let's just bring it down in parentheses. And then 1 times 5 is 5 over 3 times 5 is 15. Minus 1 times 3 is 3 over 5 times 3 is 15. Parentheses. Okay, so now we have 1 whole plus the difference of 5/15 minus 3/15. So let's do 15ths. Let's leave the whole because we still have 1 whole. And then 15ths. So then 5 pieces minus 3 pieces gives us 2 pieces. So 1 and 2/15 for that last one. Okay, so now we have done B, D, F together. You now need to go back and do A, C, and E. I added some of the parts for it. You need to finish it up, finish the multiplying, and then finish the subtracting, okay? Make sure you look back on the first page if you don't remember which step is next. And awesome job!